Hello everyone and welcome to At the Table. I'm your host Audrey Galix. In this edition of our program, we're going to be taking a very delicate issue out of the closet, putting it on the table because it is before the Georgia legislature. And to talk about this issue, childhood sexual abuse, I have with me Angela Williams. Angela is the founder of Voice Today, an important organization dealing with that topic, advocacy, education, helping survivors. Angela, thanks for being with us.
Audrey, it's always a pleasure to be with you, and I'm excited to have this platform to talk about the Georgia Hidden Predator Act today.
And explain to our viewers exactly what's going on.
This is a critical piece of legislation that would really give justice to survivors in a way that it would open the courtroom doors. We are asking for an extension of the statute of limitations that's currently 5 years, and we want to extend that 35 years.
What does that mean exactly? Let's take each piece of this, if we could, individually.
So what it means today is if there is a child that's sexually abused under the age of 18, they have 5 years past the age of majority, which means 5 years plus 18 is 23 years old. We know from research that the median age of disclosure is not even until 40 years old. So to suggest that a survivor is capable, is healed enough, and is ready to go and face their perpetrator in a court of law at age 23 is just not realistic. So what we are asking is to give that victim time to disclose in their own timing and give them time to heal so that they can take action. And what we find is on average, one perpetrator can have up to 117 victims. So once one victim comes forward, it gives the permission, almost the courage for other victims to come forward. So we are asking for our legislator to please change this law, extend the statute of limitations. Number two, it provides a window clause. So for 24 months, a 2-year window would be set that at any age you could press charges against your perpetrator. All laws are going forward, so when we get the law passed, it would be from 2015 for 35 years going forward. So what this window gives a 24-month retroactivity to the bill so that the perpetrators that are have perpetrated in the past, that their victims have a voice and their victims can get justice and their victims can go into a court of law. Last but not least is a very important part of this bill, and it opens records that are currently sealed. If you are subject to any type of investigation as a child, as an adult, you have no right to those records. As an adult, there is evidence sitting there that is sealed and you do not have available for any type of court action that you would want to take.
I think for many of us that would seem completely unbelievable.
It is unbelievable, isn't it? It just makes you want to stop and think who put that into practice. But we're here fighting for justice for survivors. We're fighting for their voices to be heard.
And how big is this problem, would you say, in Georgia or nationwide?
I don't think anyone knows how big this problem is, Audrey. When you look at statistics that tell us 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused before they're 18 years old, that's a hard pill to swallow. But then you look and see that only 1 in 10 ever tell. I really don't think we even know the magnitude of this problem. People used to ask me, is this an epidemic? It's beyond an epidemic. This is a pandemic. And it's a pandemic that most people are so uncomfortable to talk about. So there is such discomfort and stigmatization and a taboo around the issue of child sexual abuse. And unfortunately, it falls on the victims.
And I suppose that contributes to why there is such silence. What are some of the other factors, perhaps, that keep people from telling, keep kids from telling?
I think one of the greatest factors for victims to remain silent is they are very much ashamed and they are in very much a place of guilt and even feel somewhat responsible. If you look statistically, 93% of children are abused by someone they know, love, and trust. And we're conditioned in our society for what? Stranger danger. It's going to be a stranger, and it's not. It's a family member, it's a coach, it's a teacher, it's someone within their church, it's someone within their family or their extended family. We know statistically that 60% are abused by fathers or stepfathers. As myself, I was sexually abused by my stepfather. So when you have that dynamic of the perpetrator being so close to the child, there is a lot of emotional and physical control that that perpetrator has over the child. They groom the child, and they help the child to be paralyzed in a place where they are intimidated by fear, by manipulation. If you tell, I'm going to tell people it was your fault. If you tell, I'm going to hurt your mother, your brother. I'm going to act out on your siblings. So that victim is in a place of complete fear of what's going to happen when they do tell.
And my understanding is a lot of kids not only don't tell, but then they act out in certain other ways. I was wondering if you could give some examples of what a child might do.
We are so conditioned in our society to ignore the signs and symptoms of child sexual abuse. But if you see a child that has a radical change in behavior, our alarms should go off. If you see a child that begins to act out, perhaps wet the bed, have urinary tract infections, have pain sitting down, we might dismiss that as they're hyperactive, or we might dismiss that as puberty. So there's so many things that we dismissed, real obvious signs of child sexual abuse. Perhaps they begin to lie. Perhaps they begin to act out with a great amount of rage. Perhaps their grades begin to drop. So there are a lot of things that we may see one sign and then another sign, and we're not putting it together to think this child may be at risk to being sexually abused. So I think that Voice Today really wants to educate our society on how to predict child sexual abuse, how to prevent child sexual abuse, and how to, most importantly, recognize the signs and symptoms so that you can intervene responsibly.
And then let's say a child does approach another responsible adult, a parent, a teacher. What are perhaps some of the ways an adult can help that child in terms of navigating that truth-telling once they come forward?
Well, unfortunately, what we see a lot at Voice Today in dealing with so many survivors, that first disclosure is usually met with denial. And what happens is it shuts the child up. The child is met with such panic and anger and just a rage of emotions that the child is like, oh my gosh, I should have never said anything. And then fear sets in. Am I going to be taken from the home? Am I going to be put in a juvenile home, foster care? So there's a lot of fear around this issue. What an adult should do when they receive a disclosure is they should use reflective listening. They should repeat what the child said, and they should say, tell me more. That adult should be taking very precise notes, and that adult should call law enforcement immediately. They should affirm to the child that they've done nothing wrong. They should let the child know that they are an adult and it is their job to protect them. They should let the child know that whatever threats have been levied against them or those that they love, that they will protect them. And they should at that moment call law enforcement. I say all the time, if a child is shot in your living room and bleeding profusely, you don't think twice. You run as fast as you can run and you call 911 and you get aid for that child. When there is a disclosure of child sexual abuse, it needs to be met with the same type of urgency as the same type of crime. A child's innocence has been murdered. Their soul has been murdered. Yet we try to do our own investigation and we try to think, oh, Uncle so-and-so would never have done that. There must be some tragic mistake. And we try to just justify what the child has told us. If we suspect, we must respond. That is a crime, and we need to call law enforcement.
I know before we went on air, you were talking about oftentimes there is a lack of physical evidence that law enforcement would need. Perhaps should an adult begin to gather some items that could be used as an exhibit of some
I
sort?
think adults need to let the experts and the professionals gather what evidence they need to gather, because you are at that point working with a crime scene. So I would not suggest that they begin an investigative process when they're not trained and they're not equipped. I would say that they would be willing to help with the investigation and turn over any items that might be pertinent to the investigation.
The other question is what happens perhaps when a parent calls law enforcement? Are there instances where perhaps they are not trained adequately or need some additional training in order to handle these kinds of situations?
I think we're all not adequately trained. I don't think our medical community, our law enforcement, our court system, I think that there is a great deal of work to do across the line in every single profession to help be educated on child sexual abuse. I think that we just want to be in denial. We want to be in a place of denial. So I think there's a great deal of room for improvement in all areas.
I want to go back to the legislative process a little bit. Where are we with this House Bill 17, the Hidden Predator Act?
We had our first subcommittee meeting, hearing last Monday. We had a great showing of survivors who were there and willing and eager to give testimony. We had two expert witnesses that one flew in from New York. Marcy Hamilton is the utmost expert on statute of limitation reform around the country. And Georgia ranks as the lowest, one of 5 states that were the lowest opening the doors of justice for survivors. So she was there. We also had a mental health professional that gave testimony. And so that hearing was not able to be completed because there were so many survivors that wanted their voice. They wanted their opportunity to really educate our legislators on how important this is and why they didn't have their voice at age 23 and why they couldn't take action and why they didn't get justice in our criminal court system.
Will there be another opportunity for them to speak?
Yes, and if your viewers would please go to voicetoday.org/act. We also have a Facebook page, the Hidden Predator Act of Georgia, and we will be updating those locations on the next hearing.
If you could, tell us a few of the things that some of those survivors talked about to the legislators.
Well, I myself shared my story, and you know very well, Audrey, that I'm a survivor. I was sexually abused from age 3 to 17 by my stepfather. And I think the greatest point that I made is at age 23, I was nowhere equipped to face my stepfather in a court of law. But age 49 today, I would, if the courtroom doors were open to me, I would seek justice. And I would seek justice, not in a punitive sense, but to expose him, to make sure that no other child would be victimized in his path. Other survivors shared the same, that they felt that they really deserved for the courtroom doors to be opened. We had Justin Conway, who his abuser was a karate coach, still in his community, still abusing other children, and his statute of limitations has run out. And there is enough evidence, both confirmed by the GBI that and the DA, that his perpetrator charges need to be brought, but because of the situation with the statute of limitations, they're not able to. So you hear story after story after story where I was not able as a young adult, but I am an adult now and I want this perpetrator stopped. And I think that's the greatest motivation of most survivors of child sexual abuse. And I think that your viewers need to look at this as what we're asking is for the cost to be shifted from the victim to the perpetrator. Victims have borne the cost for years of mental health, of physical health, of perhaps loss of jobs or promotions in trying to deal with the trauma that this perpetrator caused.
Hold that thought. We will be back in just a moment after a bit of a break. We're here at the table and speaking with Angela Williams of Voice Today about childhood sexual abuse and what can be done to stop predators. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to At the Table. I'm your host, Audrey Galix. We are talking about childhood sexual abuse and efforts in the state of Georgia to stop that, to catch the predators and give justice to the survivors. I'm here with Angela Williams, the founder of Voice Today. Angela, thank you again for being with us on At the Table. During the break, we were talking a little bit about the reaction of legislators to the testimony of survivors. What was it that you heard?
I heard that they were asking a lot of questions. I think they are a reflection of society in general that don't understand this issue, don't understand why a 35-year statute would be meaningful. So we tried very hard to educate them on that, and we are very hopeful that they will do their homework and that they will hear our voices and that they will respond favorably.
yet there might be some little bit of jockeying for different proposals, or something a little bit different than what you've proposed might actually.
I think their greatest concern is that, especially when you're looking at vicarious liability, a third party that may be liable, an institution, on whether those records are still available, on whether testimony is still available. So I understand that their concern that there is liability that will be created, that honestly most institutions keep very good records, so those records will be accessible. So I think there again, there's just a lot of fear about what could happen, but at the end of the day, it's their choice to really protect the victims or protect the perpetrators. And we're asking that they protect the victims and that they give victims of child sexual abuse a voice in our court system.
Now, beyond the extension of the statute of limitations, opening records, et cetera, that you've proposed, are there any other steps on down the road in the future that perhaps, if in the best possible world, you'd like to see actually instituted?
You know, I only deal with an idealistic world, Audrey, so of course we are going back. Of course we want to continue to look at improving our criminal statute that requires DNA evidence for prosecution currently. That's very difficult for a survivor of child sexual abuse. Of course we want to look at prevention initiatives that we could have some type of joint private-public partnership so we can begin to get prevention into our communities. I think everyone that has the responsibility of a child, be it in their home, be it in their community, be it in their church, in their school, they need to be vigilantly trained on how to predict and prevent child sexual abuse. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make that happen.
How early can one start to educate a child? You know, you mentioned something about how we're trained stranger danger. You know, that's a nice little, you know, quip we can all remember, but in actuality, it's someone who we love, trust.
No love and trust is what we say 93% of the time. What we try to do at Voice Today, and we have so many programs on our website, voicetoday.org, that your viewers can look at, but in one of our programs called Tough Talk to Tender Hearts, we really encourage that you start early. You start when the child is able to communicate. So at age 2, they would be taught the anatomical names of their body parts. They would be taught that they are their private parts. No one is to touch or view their private parts. So to give the child the power and the education and the knowledge of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. We don't want to instill fear in children, so I think when you say 93% of the time it's in the family or extended family, what Voice Today helps you teach is that good people make bad decisions, that good people may do something that's inappropriate and that they need to tell you, because that person needs to know that that is not appropriate in your family. So it's about opening a line of communication with children, helping children understand that not all authority is good, helping children have a voice to say, I'm not comfortable with that, and come and tell you or tell a trusted adult.
And I could say as a parent or a teacher, that is a very touchy subject.
It's very delicate.
What are some of the other programs that Voice Today is engaged in? I see you brought some materials here.
I just grabbed this brochure. Our Physicians' Power to Protect is a new initiative, and what we are working on is to integrate prevention into the well check of a child. So if you think about the most credible source in your child's life is your pediatrician. So what Voice Today is hoping is to partner with the medical community and say, let's train you, let's train your staff on child sexual abuse. Let's help you know how to train the caregiver and train the child. I think most parents are so afraid of this issue, yet they feel so ill-equipped. They don't have the resources. So Voice Today wants to put resources in their hands to educate, make them aware. This is a risk in your child's life.
I was just thinking how a lot of times you go to the pediatrician, they talk about, do you wear seat belts? Do you have firearms in the home?
Immunizations. This is a public safety issue, and this needs to be dealt with like a public safety issue. So what we're hoping is, in this initiative, we're working with Emory University, that we can put together a standardized training program for the medical community and put together standardized resources that each caregiver would be given. And then ultimately the child could be asked, you know, is there anyone in your life that makes you feel uncomfortable? I'm your doctor and you can tell me. How credible would that child's testimony be in a court of law if that pediatrician is there testifying on behalf and advocating on behalf of that child? And then maybe looking at that child's medical records to say, oh my goodness, 3 months ago they had a urinary tract infection, and then there was a change in behavior. The child became depressed, and then there was acting out in school, and this has been reported over the last 3 years. And begin to put those pieces together. I think we look at this in silos, and we need to, not any one of these behaviors may lead, but in a combination, when you look at them together, this may be a telltale sign that that child is a victim of child sexual abuse.
And I'm also thinking something similar could be done in schools, school counselors, teachers, etc.
Exactly, but I think if it starts in the medical community with doctors being able to have prevention education distributed through the doctor's offices, I have very big dreams for this, Audrey, very big dreams. If you can envision taking and you have children, you're a mom, so taking your child to the doctor and be given perhaps an iPad or an app that you could sit there during your 15-minute wait time and actually get prevention education, be educated on the signs and symptoms. So when you go back to have that exam time with the doctor, maybe you've got questions. Maybe you've got questions about your niece or your nephew or your next door neighbor or your own child. So it opens up this dialogue that just does not exist in our society right now.
You know, this is even a bigger issue. I'm thinking the I can't even say the word, the commoditization or the sexualizing of our children younger and younger.
The toxic images and the toxic media and the toxic messages that our children are receiving today really inhibits their ability to have good, strong boundaries because we're not modeling and we're not teaching it.
I remember seeing a T-shirt at a Walmart that had a barcode on it, and it was something like "check me out" or something like that. And again, these are perhaps even subtle messages that, you know, uncomfortable touch is something you should get comfortable with, or something like that.
I think that what we are telling our children is that they really don't have a right to their own bodies, and they don't have a right for people to respect their bodies or them to respect other bodies. And I think we need to kind of look at society as a whole when the precious gift of sex is really being very commercialized in so many ways. Sex sells everything in our society, from TV shows to products to, and these children, they see these messages and they don't understand. And when you have little toddlers being, you know, made up to look very sexualized, I think we're sending very mixed messages. And I think what children need to understand that they have a right to their bodies and their private parts, and sex is for adults. It is not for children.
I remember a long time ago, in fact, I think when we first met, it was around the issue of child sex trafficking here in the metro Atlanta areas.
Yes.
We've perhaps heard the message many, many times that Atlanta is a hub. Mm-hmm. And I recall you were making the point about, you know, child sexual abuse being linked, and quite frankly, and I know I've said this to you under other circumstances, that's like, I didn't get it, and it's like, well enough already. And yet, there is a link. 90%
or more, I really say 90 to 95% of those children that are sexually exploited commercially have been sexually abused in their homes. So if we can prevent the child that's sexually abused at 4, 5, and 6, we can stop them from running away, from being addicted to drugs at 11, 12, and 13. If we can stop the sexual abuse in their homes at the younger age, we can stop that child from being over-sexualized. We can stop the bleeding, and that's what it is, it's bleeding. Our children are bleeding right now, and they don't have a voice, and they don't pay taxes, and they don't vote. So we need every viewer that's listening to please help us stand up and be their voice.
So we've talked about what the legislature is up to, some of the ways that we can prevent it. What about on the other end, once perhaps someone has survived? Understand that there are a number of programs that are offered to help them navigate the emotional damage, etc.?
Well, the beautiful part of Voice Today is we try to look at this in a very holistic approach. We try to look at this from the awareness standpoint, from the advocacy standpoint, from the prevention standpoint, but really what closes the circle and stops the cycle is the healing and restoration. Our society does a very poor job of helping survivors process the trauma of child sexual abuse. They really want them to go behind closed doors for an hour with a therapist, and we don't really want to hear about it at the dinner table or anywhere else in your world. And that does not promote healing. We need to heal in community. So Voice Today offers workshops, healing workshops. We offer support groups. We are working on a virtual support group so that we can reach more people. And then one of our most powerful programs is our retreats. We are expanding our retreat program. We had 2 last year. We're hoping to go to 7 retreats this year. And we will be offering retreats both in the spring and the fall for youth, for women, for men, and for couples, because we really feel that there's a great need to help survivors process the trauma that they've been through.
Now, when you say a retreat, what does that involve?
It's a Friday through Sunday time of intense work on issues that survivors suffer with. They suffer with self-destructive behaviors. They suffer with toxic thought patterns. They suffer with trust issues. They suffer with intimacy issues. They suffer with boundary issues. They suffer with self-loathing, that somehow this has damaged me, that I am not as good of a person, that somehow my dreams have been stunted because of this trauma. So we help them rewrite their story. We help them find that little child, no matter what age the sexual abuse happened, if it was 5, if it was 8, if it was 10, we help them find that child and help that inner child begin to heal and begin to write a different story. There is in no way that a child has power. There is in no way that a child has any fault or any blame for sexual abuse. Yet our society inadvertently puts that blame on that child. There is no consent to a child in any act of sexual violation.
We have gone from speaking about the piece of legislation before the Georgia legislature to open the courts to those who have been victimized, talked a little bit about, or a bit about prevention. What in your situation, in your personal story, has been perhaps the most therapeutic? What or who was perhaps your angel or angels?
I say there were 3 things. Number 1 is my faith in God and really surrendering my pain and offering my pain up for God to use it in any way that He saw fit. And careful when you challenge God in that way. Secondly is my husband. He has stood by me and he has loved me when I wasn't lovable. And I would say love me through the pain. And thirdly, it's the work that I do every day in helping another survivor get their voice and for fighting for justice. So I get such great reward from the work that I do in Voice Today and the people that I hopefully am leading a crusade. I consider myself a crusader. So I'm the voice for the voiceless, and I will spend my life, I think from my greatest pain has come my greatest passion, and that is seeing an end to child sexual abuse.
Angela, thank you very much. Angela Williams of Voice Today has been with us to talk about, again, a very delicate issue, childhood sexual abuse. Thank you so much for being with us on At the Table. We'll see you next time.